Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we break down key sources to give you clear, concise insights. Today, we're looking at something pretty unique.
Yes, it's a virtual interview with Pope Francis titled Humanity, Hope, and Technology. Really quite revealing.
Exactly. And this source material is particularly valuable, wouldn't you say? Not just because of who it is, but the frankness and the topics covered modern spiritual dilemmas, AI.
Absolutely. Our goal today really is to pull out the core ideas from this conversation. We want to give listeners a straightforward understanding of Pope Francis's thinking here.
Right, sort of saving you the task of sifting through the whole thing yourself, highlighting what's most significant.
And the interview itself had some ambitious goals laid out right in the source. Exploring spiritual challenges, understanding the Pope's view on tech and AI, inspiring young people, promoting universal values. Quite a list.
And right from the start, you see Pope Francis showing this openness towards technology. He calls it a very powerful bridge when it's used for connection, not isolation. That's quite a perspective from a major spiritual leader.
It really is. Yeah. So maybe let's start where he starts with what he sees as the biggest spiritual challenge today. Indifference.
Yes, indifference. He uses these very vivid images, doesn't he? Looking without really seeing, hearing without listening.
Pointing out that paradox of our time being superficially hyperconnected, yet having these, well, disconnected hearts.
Could we maybe link that observation to some, contemporary psychological phenomena?
We certainly could. You could draw parallels with concepts like moral disengagement or
Yeah.
look at the psychological effects of just information overload, constant digital stimulation. It can kind of numb our emotional responses, can it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What's crucial here is that loss of the ability to be moved, to feel that fundamental connection with others. He really stresses the urgency of rebuilding ourselves as a global community where everyone is seen, everyone matters.
So what are the consequences then of this indifference, this sort of widespread apathy on society today?
Oh, they're vast, really,
Yeah.
and complex. Socially, it weakens empathy, solidarity. It hinders how we respond together to big problems like poverty or injustice.
Right.
And on an individual level, it can lead to loneliness, a kind of existential emptiness, even when it seems like we have tons of online interactions.
The interview then shifts, doesn't it, to the relationship between the church, technology, and specifically artificial intelligence. Pope Francis's position seems to be one of reflective caution.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
He's not rejecting technological progress outright, but he calls for discernment.
Discernment, okay.
He acknowledges the potential benefits, AI and healthcare education, organizing our lives. But perhaps we could explore a bit more what that call for discernment really means in this tech context.
Definitely. And he also points out the dangers, right? If AI strays from serving humanity, becoming a tool for control, exclusion, or even replacing human conscience, how do we interpret that concern, given the current debates around AI development?
Well, his insistence on keeping the human person absolutely central, that's the benchmark for developing and using any tech. It really echoes these current discussions about needing human-centric AI. He reminds us that AI, no matter how sophisticated, lacks a spirit, and therefore it lacks that inherent understanding of morality or ethics.
It's significant, too, that he brings up the need for wisdom, referencing the gospel, as a guide for these technological leaps. How does that ancient wisdom connect with the challenges of modern innovation?
That connection is key. Progress versus ethical and spiritual principles, it's a central tension. It's not about stopping progress, but about steering it in a way that promotes, genuine human flourishing. Wisdom implies foresight, responsibility, deep thinking about the consequences.
The conversation also turns to young people. Pope Francis calls them the poets of tomorrow. That's such a suggestive metaphor. What's the particular resonance of that phrase in the context we're discussing?
Yeah, it highlights their unique ability to imagine and actually build a different future. He urges them not to lose their capacity for indignation, for outrage at injustice, and also their ability to love deeply.
Which feels like a contrast to the resignation or cynicism you sometimes see, perhaps.
Exactly. He warns them against superficiality, too, and invites them to commit to great causes, to ideals bigger than themselves. How do we interpret that invitation, thinking about today's digital culture, which can often feel quite ephemeral?
That's a good question. He emphasizes that faith isn't meant to be a retreat, a way to isolate yourself, but actually an impulse for actively transforming reality. It's a very dynamic, engaged view of spirituality.
So how do we foster that spirit, that sense of commitment and transcendence in younger generations?
A challenge. And in a world facing so much upheaval and inequality, the whole question of hope becomes really critical. Pope Francis offers a very distinct perspective on where to find it.
He does. He defines hope not as some naive optimism, but as a kind of resistance of the soul.
Resistance of the soul, I like that.
And he locates it in everyday acts of kindness by ordinary people. A grandparent caring for grandkids, a nurse working extra hours, a young person dedicating time to others. What does that view of hope imply for how we understand resilience, both individually and collectively?
It's in those silent gestures, as he calls them, that Pope Francis sees the kingdom of God being built. It's a vision of hope that feels deeply grounded in the concrete, the human.
Could we maybe analyze the significance of these quiet acts in a world that often seems dominated by, big, loud events?
Yeah, because in an environment where large-scale events and global crises often get magnified, the importance he gives these discrete but meaningful actions is really striking. It reminds us that transformation often starts small in the everyday.
Absolutely. It's a powerful counter-narrative.
Towards the end of the interview, the Pope offers a blessing for those listening or reading, wishing for serenity, light, and joy. How can we understand that gesture in the context of everything discussed before?
Well, the conclusion of the interview itself is significant because it moves beyond just talking about technology to focus on communion and deep reflection.
Ah, okay.
He reiterates that human dignity has to be the central axis for any kind of progress.
And he leaves us with this powerful invitation to dream of a more just world, to embrace spirituality with real commitment, and to keep hope alive. How do those final urgings kind of summarize the core points of his message?
I think they tie it all together nicely. The conversation, as the source's conclusion notes, doesn't really end with the interview. It continues in our acts of kindness, our ethical choices, and our willingness to love.
So just to briefly recap, we've explored Pope Francis's deep concern about indifference, his nuanced view on technology and AI, the vital role he sees for young people as agents of change, and the hope he finds in everyday goodness.
His perspective really offers a valuable guide, I think, for reflecting on the pressing challenges of our time, from a viewpoint that integrates the spiritual and the worldly.
Which leads us to a final question for you, our listeners. In what tangible ways can we cultivate that capacity to be moved in our own daily lives, pushing back against the indifference Pope Francis is so concerned about?
Or maybe, how can we ensure that technological advancement genuinely serves human flourishing and doesn't actually become an obstacle to our full potential? We invite you to keep thinking about these important questions.